Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland Hahn Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Hahn Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Miles Palmer. Miles is a trustee and the ex-commodore at Thames Sailing Club, one of the UK's oldest river sailing clubs, founded in 1870, located between Surbiton and Kingston. What's unique about Thames Sailing Club is how they are such a relaxed club, where sailing for fun is the main aim. And be sure to listen to the end, where Miles shares with us some of the many ways in which you can be part of the club and be part of a community that enjoys being on the river. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the sailing club or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Miles Palmer, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Miles, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, the Thames Sailing Club is one of the UK's oldest river sailing clubs, and it's right here on our doorstep. So I'm keen to speak with you and let our listeners, or give our listeners, a chance to get to know more about the club. And I think that myself and our listeners can also learn more about the sailing activities that are available through the club, again, right here on our doorstep, from somebody as experienced in that community as you. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So Miles, when did you grow up?
Where did I grow up, or when did I grow up?
Oh, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Notting Hill Gate, actually, in this kind of the West End of London. My father commuted into town, and we kind of grew up around Holland Park and Notting Hill and did all of those sorts of things.
Very cool. And what did you study after secondary school?
My degree is in electronic and electrical engineering, and I've done a master's in business administration, and went into work for the BBC. Was my first real job. I did some kind of, I don't know what you call apprenticeships or things like that with Philips, but the BBC. I was with the BBC for 20 years, so. They're probably the employer of note, and everybody knows them.
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And how did sailing come into your life? When did you get exposed to it, and when was it that it clicked that it's something that was going to become a lifelong passion as such?
Well, it's probably boating to start off with. My parents had a narrow boat. And we had that from when I was probably 5 or 6, and we went around the canals. And being a narrow boat, it's quite long, 60 foot long. And my parents were doing the locks, and I was driving from the age of 7 or something. They had a little box so I could steer and see over the top of the narrow boat, and my parents kind of worked the locks, and I was the driver. So from a young age, been messing around with boats. My father had a small sailing boat, which we used to go on holidays around the south coast of England and the east coast around Essex, Suffolk. And so I was probably involved with boats since a very young age. And then I kind of really got into sailing kind of competitively at university. It's a great sport in that it completely occupies you. You're both physically exerted and mentally, because you're trying to work out where the wind is and and how you position yourself on a race course compared to your competitors. And so it was great at university because I always was late putting in assignments. I had that nagging feeling in the back of my head about which assignment I had to do next. And sailing was my escape. And that's really when I kind of got into it.
That's fascinating. Well, I'll share with you a bit of a fun fact that I haven't shared on the show before. So the listeners will know that I'm originally from the Brazilian Midwest. But when my mum was pregnant with me and my mum and dad, they still didn't know what name they were going to give me. This Brazilian adventurer, he's a rower and a sailor called Amyr Klink, became the first guy to cross the Atlantic from the African continent to Brazil. And he happened to arrive the month I was born. And as I was born a boy, Brazil obviously was over the moon that this, great Brazilian hero had done this amazing feat. My dad said, right, I am going to name my son Amyr. And he actually wrote to Amyr Klink to say this. And Amyr Klink then sent me his book a couple of years later, autographed and everything else, saying, I can't believe somebody has named their son after me. So honored, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that was my initiation into something that I haven't never taken up as a lifelong passion. But still, there's always that link with rowing in that particular case. But Amyr Klink is a world-renowned sailor as well. So that's really interesting. Now, Miles, bringing this conversation a little bit more to the present, could you tell us a bit more about the Thames Sailing Club as it stands today?
Yes, I mean, it's probably worth taking you through a little bit of a chronology.
Please.
Thames Sailing Club was set up in 1870 by some local kind of well-to-do folk as a way of having a pastime, and that kind of grew over the years and was particularly interesting and successful in the early 20th century when many of the local aviating kind of people of Kingston, whether that was builders or because boat builders became aircraft builders because they could build light spars and things like that. And then the managing director of Hawker, a chap called Field, T.S. Field, became the commodore of Thames Sailing Club in the early 20th century. And so it's been part of Kingston for 150 years, but many people don't know where it exists because it sits behind a mound of earth, which was the spoil from Seething Wells sewage works. And so you can't really see it very well, but it sits next to Hart's Boatyard. And over the years has become quite famous in a way because we have the unique Thames A-rater, which is A meaning a type of rating, as in it was quite a large rating dinghy, sailed by 3 people with just a centreboard, and now has a 40-foot carbon mast. So that's pretty interesting as part of the club. And since the Second World War, other classes have become involved with the club, and we managed to buy the freehold from Thames Water after a bit of a to-do in the late 1990s. And just in the last year, we've transferred from being a kind of non-incorporated members club to being a charity, because we've run for the last 20 odd years training courses and things like that, which were open and are open to anyone. And really, it seemed a bit strange to not be a charity in a way, because that's what we were doing. We were engaging people in training and putting participation sport, amateur sport there for people to enjoy. And also 10 years ago, we developed a relationship with the Blue Chip SUP Club, which is stand-up paddleboards, and now they're an integral part of the club. So it's really a water sports club rather than a sailing club. I mean, it's still called Thames Sailing Club because of the history, but it's a water sports club on the River Thames. next to Hart's Boatyard and Surbiton, Kingston borders. And we really want anybody and everybody to feel that they can come down and enjoy the place. The activity tends to happen on a Saturday with stand-up paddle boards, on a Sunday with sailing, Tuesday evening from about 6:30 with sailing, and then Wednesday evening is a stand-up paddleboard session, and then there are other bits and pieces that happen. Very much run by the members as a volunteer organisation. So it's quite sweet in a way, because it is a bit hidden from the world. So it's quite a little oasis.
Absolutely. Yeah, and hence I was keen to talk to you guys here on the podcast. You know, Miles, the really interesting thing about the sort of wider Kingston area as such is just historically, especially over these last 110, 120 years, just the amount of engineering output that we can talk about. I mean, Brooklands, when it comes to sort of motorcycle or motor car engineering, we have the different airplanes that have been built in the area, especially during and before that sort of Second World War period. Of course, the technology and the engineering around sailing. And we brushed upon the Thames A-raters there. But actually, when we see those boats in the river today, we're actually looking at a bit of history sailing along the River Thames, aren't we? Because the technology as it was at the time was pretty out there.
Yeah, I mean, most of the Thames A-raters are owned by syndicates, so a group of people. And the boat that I sail is called Vagabond, built in 1907.
Wow.
Designed by a chap called Linton Hope. Now, Linton Hope also designed floats for seaplanes. Was very successful designer for floats for seaplanes. Also went to I think it was the 1906 Olympics and sailed one of his boats on the Seine because it was in Paris. So, as you say, and then people like Burgoyne, who used to build boats, and he also was building hollow spars for the aircraft, for the Sopwith Camel and things like that. So there's a lot of crossover, as you say, with that technology. It's all good, and we sail quite often down at a sister club called Thames, which is actually on the opposite bank. It's on the Middlesex bank, just I suppose between Teddington Lock and Canberra Gardens. And when Hawker was there, we were sailing past Hawker every time we went down there.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. Now, you've mentioned there the way the club aims to make itself accessible to different folks, and your website also is very clear in showing the different types of membership, the different types of activities as you've described them there that might pique an interest in different type of people, of course. But and I appreciate right now we're still at the sort of the back end, hopefully, of these COVID lockdowns that we've been going through over the last 12 to 14 months. But in regular times, how do you attract potential new members to the club? Are there sort of non-member events that people can attend? Are there times which they can just rock up to the bar and introduce themselves to the community?
Well, as I say, the best way is to come on during the weekend or a Tuesday or Wednesday evening. Membership is really affordable because we've reconstructed the whole membership fee process. So actually, to become a member is £50 for a year. You could become a day member, and that's £20. And day member would also allow you access to a number of club boats, because we've got club sailing boats and we've got club paddle boards that people can potentially use as well. So you don't actually need anything other than a change of clothes to start off with. And then from that kind of basic membership, we have what we call participation fees. Depending upon what you do, when you do it, you pay a little bit more because there's more infrastructure needed, rescue boats, things like that. And then we also run courses throughout the year, a lot of junior courses for children during the summer holidays. That's always good fun. And it's quite interesting because we've got quite a big area to sail in. We can sail from Kingston Bridge all the way up to Hampton Court Bridge.
Oh, wow.
So that takes you quite a long way because there's a big bend in the river at that point. So you can sail, as I say, from Kingston Bridge down past Ravensgate up to Thames Marina, around past Thames Island, and people might know the Swan or the Albany pubs, up to Hampton Court. And once a year we do what we call a long distance race, which goes from, in a complete loop, from one bridge from the Sailing Club up to Hampton Court Bridge, back to Kingston Bridge and back to the Sailing Club, which is quite a while. And I should also mention that we've got probably the biggest stand-up paddleboard event in the country as well, called the Battle of the Thames, which it attracts 150 to 200 paddleboards, and it's quite a big event. And depending upon the conditions, they can also do this long course, which is quite taxing.
That's really interesting. And Miles, I know I mentioned the word COVID there, and hopefully, as I said, we're at the back end of this in the UK now. We're recording now at mid-May. But how has the COVID-19 lockdowns affected the club?
That's a very good point. I mean, it's been really difficult, especially as an organizer of the club. Initially, we shut everything down. We actually had a really nice celebration in late February, as we do every year, with all of the past commodores coming together, and that was great fun last February 2020. And then everything shut until probably, I think it was about June time, when we were allowed to do this. You're allowed to do activities with your family group, and so people went down. We couldn't go inside, but we've got some outdoor spaces, even outdoor covered spaces, so that was quite good. And I sailed with my wife. My son sailed with his wife, and there were people were sailing with their family groups, which was just different and great. It was quite fun. And then over the winter, we tend not to do much sailing because the river goes into floods, and it makes it quite hard. And plus, these old boats like to be tucked away when it gets cold and wet. And so from the 29th of March this year, we've been back on the water. We've followed the guidance from the RYA, the Royal Yachting Association, which has been pretty straightforward in terms of whether it's groups of 6 or what have you. The boats we tend to sail are 2 or 3 people, so it's not a big deal, and we're outside. So we've been sailing this year since the end of March, which has been very pleasant. And touch wood, we'll be able to go back into the clubhouse at the end of June. We haven't done any significant modifications to the clubhouse because it's quite old, and we don't really want to deface the place with loads of perspex. So it's easier to have outdoor service. So at the moment, we can have meals outside, which we tend to do on a Tuesday evening, and our bars running as well on certain days.
Very good, really good. Now, Miles, on that same vein there, of course, you being the ex-commodore of the Thames Sailing Club, you've got a lot of experience in running a club, or at least being part of the leadership team of a club. Today, of course, you're a trustee at the club. I wondered if you could share with some of our listeners who perhaps are themselves junior members of clubs or think about getting a group together to set up a club of any sort of distinction. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from heading the club and being part of the leadership team of the Thames Sailing Club?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm not sure where to start. I think anybody who does any volunteering of any sort does it for love. There's no sense of entitlement or anything like that. I've got involved because I enjoy what I do, and then I'm just feeding back, providing my time and energy to help others. But and so I would probably say, if anybody is passionate about anything, then it's good to get involved, because then you have the opportunity to make a difference, whether that's through your own contribution, your own skills, or whatever, really. And you do get good feedback. I mean, sometimes, it's pretty hard when you've got to make some difficult decisions, as we've had to do over the last year. And many of us would prefer to not to have have made those decisions, but we had to, and closing places and what have you. But from a general perspective, more people who get involved, the better. It's great when people say, "What can I do?" That's really nice to have that, and it builds a family. The Thames Sailing Club has, for the last 140 odd years, had an annual pilgrimage as part of the Thames Orator circuit. There's what they call Bourne End Week, which is sailed at Bourne End near Marlow, at a sailing club called Upper Thames Sailing Club. And so the club, Thames Sailing Club, has gone on holiday together, and it really makes for a family, that bonding time together. We used to tow the boats up the river, and it's great because my children have grown up through that, and you kind of get this kind of generational team together, which isn't like a family in that you're kind of locked into it, but it is a family in a broader sense. And I think it's really nice that people, children, get spoken to by people who are 60 years older than them from a different place, and there's this opportunity to grow as a person. And I think one of the good things, our patron used to be Prince Philip, very sad, and he's come down to the club a couple of times, and the whole point of the Duke of Edinburgh Award was about putting young people into a position of risk, in a way, so that they understand and can manage their own risks. And sailing is very much like that, especially when you're out on the sea. You're managing your position with the elements around you. And we are quite unique in that, as we race a lot, and so we're quite competitive, but actually your fellow competitor is often the person who can provide your first assistance if you get into trouble. And so there is that quite a tight bond between people who go on the water, because they understand there are risks and they're always looking out for each other in a way that I don't think you get in other sports. It is quite an interesting environment, and certainly brings people together in a nice way, I think.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you sharing those insights there. I appreciate that, because it gives our listeners and myself a sense of the community building that a well-run club actually provides to its members. So that's really, really important stuff. And I appreciate you sharing that, Miles. Thank you. Miles, what next for the club? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Well, yes, we've got a very big project in the pipeline. This project is to replace our changing facilities, which are probably over 50 years old and definitely showing signs of wear, and our boat storage facilities. So yes, we've got a very big project underway that we're now going through a fundraising campaign. We've got to get to close to £1 million, so it's not a small project, but we strongly believe that it will provide the facilities for the club to last another 150 years. The important thing from all of those people who've been part of the Thames Sailing Club for the last few decades is that we're not touching the actual the clubhouse itself. And there's lots of little artifacts in the clubhouse from many years, and it's quite a quaint little wooden structure, and we're just not touching that, but looking to develop, as I say, the bits that really matter in terms of longevity about changing rooms. I mean, people like to get changed in the warm and have warm showers and all the rest of it. And we've got to move with those times, and we've got planning permission to do that. It's now down to all of us to get the money to make it happen.
Exciting times ahead.
Sorry.
I said exciting times ahead.
Yes, it should be. I mean, if we can get it started in the next 3 years, we will be very pleased. And actually, part of it is to remove part of that spoil heap that obscures the club from the Portsmouth Road, so that people can actually see more about what happens and see more of the activity. Because, as I say, it is a little bit hidden. But we're very keen for anybody to come down and just say hello and see what happens.
That's great. Miles, as we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, apart from sailing, what do you do to relax outside of the office as such?
I like to cycle, actually. So cycling is quite a good thing for me.
Excellent. And are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Books I've read. Well, I tend to read when I'm on holiday, and I haven't been on holiday for a while, so that's not tripping off the tongue. But there is a very good book that I would recommend anybody who wants to get into sport. And it's by Matthew Syed, and it's called Bounce. And it talks about elite, the making of elite sports people, which is very interesting because it doesn't come at it from the traditional sense of the word.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'll definitely put that on the to-read list. And are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Wow, TV shows. Well, to be honest, TV shows have been a bit boring recently. So we've been doing Netflix a lot. So there's Friends to have a laugh and chill out to. There's Homeland, which my wife are getting into. Those sorts of things. I
definitely second Homeland. It's a very good show. Easy to get into, that one.
Yes, indeed.
Brilliant. And finally, Miles, where can people go to find out more about the club?
So the website's probably the easiest one, which is Thames Sailing Club, all one word, .co.uk.
Great. And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add that link to the show notes. Miles.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Miles, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thank you, Amyr. It's good to speak to you as well.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.